Welcome to LegacyCast, your source for hearing from top influencers, industry experts, and successful business owners who are telling their unique story about life, values, goals, business strategies, and the various causes they are so passionate about. Future generations will come to be impacted by what is happening today, whether positive or negative, and our mission is to focus on what is going to affect change for the better. Hosted each weekday by James Snow, a former U.S. Army combat medic, now founder and principal advisor of James Advisors Group, a full-service financial planning firm in North Texas. This is LegacyCast. Welcome to the program today, LegacyCast listeners. This is your host, James Snow, coming to you from North Texas. We have another great, interesting veteran buddy that's going to be a guest today, Glenn Banton. You probably have heard of him from Operation Supply Drop, but he's got a lot of other things going that he's doing as well. So, we wanted to be able to talk to him today, and certainly appreciate him taking time out of his extremely busy schedule, running a business and being part of multiple boards and committees and what have you. So, Glenn, welcome to the program today. But
hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's we're here in North Texas. We had a little bit of rain over the evening, which was a surprise because up until today it's been 110, 120, 130, something like that. It's kind of like being in the sandbox again. It's sort of rough over here. So. I guess you have better weather where you're at.
Hey, I'm just south of y'all, so I'm off to the west of Austin in Central Texas. So we've been getting the rain dumped on us as well, and certainly this time of year we need it. Helps keep the watering bills down around the property.
Yeah, and you got more humidity than we have. So, man,
yeah, okay.
Those mosquitoes that carry away your dog and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's good. It's always nice to speak to a fellow. I'm an honorary Texan. I've been in Texas the majority of my life, but it's always nice to speak to folks in this great state.
Yep. Yeah, we kind of think different and act different and believe differently here in Texas. So
that's the truth.
So here on LegacyCast, like I always tell the listeners and the guests that come on, we talk about legacy, but it's kind of a broad subject because it's really more about a lifestyle. It's the way that you're living. It's not just finance, but it's also educational, societal, what have you. What the things that you're doing in your life that's going to affect change for other people, and it's going to create as the analogy goes, ripples in the pond when you throw a pebble into it. It's kind of like that with legacy, that the things you're doing today are going to resonate into the next multiple generations. And I myself find it very important that we need to do things very deliberately and very intentionally because we are going to affect other people either for the good or for the bad, and so we have to be mindful of that. But when you're thinking, Glenn, of legacy in your particular instance, what comes to mind?
Mainly, in mine, I think it might be with a lot of people, especially fathers. It's my kids. I've got two kids. I've got a high school daughter, and a fifth grade son. And especially in today's time, where again we're arguably the most distracted we've ever been. We have all these fantastic technological advancements, and we're hyper connected, but arguably the most antisocial in human history. And you look at all these, again, great things, these double-edged swords, and I try to figure out, what can I do to make things better, not just for my kids, but also encourage them to understand a lot of the underlying principles that drive me every single day. It's not about, being on social media all the time. It's not about, shallow relationships that they or, their peer group might not even understand. It's about getting to know a core group of people through, shared values and shared experiences. And so when it comes to legacy, it's more about what am I going to leave behind as far as, again, philosophy and beliefs and values that's going to allow other people to be successful in their life.
Yeah, well put. And yeah, I think that at the core, that really is what it should be about. It's not, like I always tell people, just because I'm in finance doesn't mean that money is the only part of legacy. And that may be the vehicle that helps you carry your story, but it's not the story itself. That's just a vehicle. And there has to be something greater in that. There has to be a reason behind everything. And so, what is the reason that people are doing things? So I really appreciate the way that you were putting that, because that kind of brings into scope, how you're looking at the big picture. Do you feel like it's an important consideration that each person, they're listening today, that they really spend some time and energy to, on a daily basis, even to consider, what are they doing? How is it going to impact into that legacy concept?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of it, if you really think about it, you and I are talking about it as the word legacy, but really is my time valuable? What's the ROI on my time? I mean, those are the other ways to look at it, because if you're not doing something that is in fact valuable, you can't leave a legacy. And so, for myself on a daily basis, and mind you, my ADD has me kind of, all over the place all the time with all these, my hands in so many cookie jars, you'd think I'm in a bakery, but it's understanding each action and how that impacts another person. Sure. If I look at kind of that drive behind things, it is faith driven. I truly believe, we're put here to serve others in varying capacities with the gifts that we've been bestowed. And it's tough because, again, there's only 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days in a year. And we have all these great, opportunities, people. But how do you choose? I think that's really the hard part, is where do you focus your time? And every single day, within, there's all these different, plans, I guess you can follow, but it's, even taking some time to, whether it's, pray, read the Bible, meditate, spend time in nature, depending upon, where your mindset is at. Taking that introspective time to say, what am I going to do today that is going to, make a mark on the world, if you will, so that I can make somebody else's life better and thus leave my legacy.
Yeah. And you pointed out something there that actually is something that I personally do each day is, when I start my morning is thinking, who's going to come into my circle today that I can help? And that's part of my prayer and meditation each morning is for me to have those abilities to help and bless the next person that comes into my circle.
Absolutely.
And so it helps me to start my morning and the rest of the day in a very good position, because it takes we tend to be control freaks sometimes as entrepreneurs. I know that I am very much by nature a control freak. But it helps kind of take that control from me and sort of push away a little bit so that I can handle things better. Because if I'm trying to control the needle so much, then I end up pushing it too far to the left or too far to the right and can end up messing things up. So
interesting. Yeah,
it's a good way to start the morning.
Well, and it's even within that, and interesting enough. So, as I'd mentioned to you, I'm a civilian that's been in the veteran space for 15, 20 years at this point, and certainly what I've picked up on, and I think it's where a lot of the connectivity comes, is a lot of the underlying mentalities and philosophies from there. So I've learned force multiplying has always been my favorite concept in business or even in personal life about again, making a mark, because there's only so much that you and I can do individually. It's how do we cultivate that next layer of people to, again, force multiply this philosophy. And then secondary to that, and it's the learning to let go and delegate. It's commander's intent. That's where being the CEO of OSD and also an executive at a bunch of other organizations, my mentors, my peers have really said, hey, Glenn, you need to understand commander's intent. Your job is to lay out the big picture vision based upon what your wisdom, and then help cultivate the people that will help execute that on a day-to-day basis. And so it's interesting to play around with those, because you still, obviously, you and I have our businesses we work in, and then there's the personal side. And I can't help it. Every once in a while I look at my calendar and, the next week I have 18, mentorship calls, and that's great. Yeah. I love helping people, but at the same time I'm going, is that the best use of my time? Now, individual one-to-one, it absolutely is. Is it from the big picture of truly making a bigger mark? I don't know. And that's really where my daily challenge comes down to, that planning of how do we make sure and pay the bills, impact some people, take care of my family, take care of myself, and then, wake up and do it again the next day.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to the next part of this is, how do you, from a business standpoint, correlate, this kind of a mindset of doing things deliberately so that it goes into that bigger picture? How do you correlate that into your business?
So it's always changing. I mean, macro level is trying to figure out how to balance, and it's not, I don't believe in the whole concept of work-life balance. And so I'd say I would preface any answer here by leading with, it's this concept. When a lot of people see me, they say, "Oh man, you wear so many different hats." And I used to sort of buy into that. And then I realized a couple of years ago, I said, no, I don't wear lots of hats. I wear one hat. I'm the same guy that shows up no matter what I'm doing, whether it's my nonprofit stuff, it's the for-profit stuff, it's community stuff, it's all the same. And so once you have that as a premise to your being in existence every single day, it starts to become a little bit easier, because you start determining, well, it's about relationship building first and foremost. Sure. Now, those relationships might lead a bunch of different paths. That maybe it's becoming a volunteer, skilled leader. Maybe it's a donor. Maybe it's a, somebody that's doing business within, my for-profit stuff. But it has to start somewhere. And so, really, what I've done is figured out, how do I look at things in increments of time and task it down to, executing against a bigger vision. All that being said, what I've been a big fan of, especially this year, and implemented it a few times formally, is the concept of EOS. So that's anybody's listening, go check out at eosworldwide.com. It's the same mentality that stems from the book Traction, which many people that are listening, I'm sure, have actually read. And a couple unique elements within that. And it's an organizational philosophy that you can apply even to a sole proprietorship if you wanted to. But it looks at accountabilities first and foremost, is how you describe roles, and so even down to myself. And then it looks at goal setting from that 10, 3, 1 year perspective, but then it boils it down to quarters. And a lot of that has some psychology behind it, but it's realizing that typically we can't focus on something for more than 90 days at a time. Take that out to scale with a large organization, and you can see why many kind of are all over the place. But then even within that, it takes this concept of rocks. So your big focus projects, and really uses those as an anchor to determine what your day-to-day looks like. And so that's what I've had to do, because there's, it seems like there are all these different balls in the air, and, before really formalizing, how do you focus? How do you then measure success? It was a constant struggle. It was a moving target every single day. And now I'm able to at least a little bit more coherently say, all right, well, I moved the needle against this specific rock or this project that needs to get done this quarter. And then really the success metric is, so long as we're executing on 80% or more of those rocks, we will be the best at what we do. That will happen. And so that's at least how I do my best. But, I'm sure 60 days from now, like I said, my ADD and attention span will say, let's, not blow up the bigger picture of EOS, but I'll do some micro thing in there to completely, mix it up, just because, I don't know, I think I enjoy controlled chaos.
Yeah, I can kind of relate with some of those pieces too, because, I had that shiny object syndrome, that some people have. And so, I'll be working on a task, and you have these other things around you that, I can very easily distract myself with. So, having that structure is so important to kind of keep my focus, because otherwise, my distraction will be horrible.
Absolutely.
So, if you're looking at your business from the CEO standpoint, are there still a few things that maybe keep you up at night about it?
It's the longer term. So let's use the OSD. We'll focus on that as an example. I mean, we've been around as an organization for 8 years. We are a global veteran support ecosystem. We're now classified as chapter based, I would say. We've had massive growth over the past 3 to 5 years, like legitimate exponential growth, especially if you look at the underlying metrics of military community members served, as well as volunteer hours, and then also some kind of trailing metrics. And from my perspective, and then even from the leadership, my fellow leadership, we want to be the next great, 100-year veteran nonprofit, a la, VFW, American Legion. And I know that's possible, but on a daily basis, we're still dealing with humans, and we're still dealing with, behavioral psychology and how people exist at scale, and then overlap that with what we talked about, to start this off about, us living in the most hyper-connected / antisocial time in human history. And so you end up with this underlying challenge of how do you bring people together for a cause? And I'm not talking about the OSD cause. I'm talking about the broader veteran support cause that many of us all participate in many different ways. Right. With a solution that actually, solves things. So, we look at things from how do we balance social, professional, and our service needs, for our veterans, their families, military community members. And it's tough because a lot of people know what they need. And again, I know this has been in existence forever. A lot of people know what they need in the back of their mind, but they won't take the steps to go actually do it. And then it's also doing things like cultivating, volunteers. And we have an absolutely amazing, group, tens of thousands of community members. But it's figuring out how to keep them motivated, pointed in the right direction, so they're feeling supported, and constantly refreshing the mission from the top level, just so, again, it's understood and so they can keep marching forward. So in probably what you're hearing, and I'm kind of wandering and dancing around on this, is it really just comes down to it's the message. So it stays the same. A mission is moderately static. However, at the same time, the way in which it fits into that broader goal, it arguably changes on a daily basis. It has to be somewhat agile, because suddenly if, we grow into Rapid City, South Dakota, and we add 500 more members there, that will change a little bit of how our organization functions, just because of geography as well as demographics of people. So that's the type of stuff. It's more getting into the weeds of just people and organizational behavior. Naturally too, there's the revenue generation side of it, which still, again, ties back into that. Nonprofits have that cycle of, you go do something great, you tell the story, that then generates additional funding and support, which allows you to go do something that you can tell a story. And it's ensuring that cycle is able to complete itself in a coherent and succinct manner. So yeah, sure there's other things that keep me up at night as well, but those are the ones that have my mind wandering. And if you look at my notebooks, like every single thing is pointing back to those underlying challenges.
Oh, cool. And there's lots of gold nuggets you're dropping in there that I'm sure people are able to pick up on. And I hope they're taking notes like I am, because there's lots of good stuff that's coming out here. So you're mentioning some things there that kind of leads me into the next question that I have, which is sort of a rhetorical question, because I kind of know the answer. But do you feel like it's important that people put strategies into place in order to conduct their business life and their personal life both?
100%. Now, I will say that with the caveat of, yes, you need a strategy. You need to think about it. It also is not, it's not a static document. It needs, unlike the 10 Commandments, it needs to change. I'd also say, and again, I know the audience will appreciate this, I'm a huge fan of John Boyd and the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, and how that can be applied to personal and business life. Without even realizing it before I'd come to understand that kind of methodology and way of thinking. That's how I've been doing business for years. It's how can I function slightly better than average, faster than everybody else? Because the output of that ends up putting you at that top tier. And then it comes back into, the patent quote about, a violent plan, or a plan violently executed today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. I still also believe in that. A lot of those mentalities come from being in the software industry for a number of years. We always have this concept of you got to ship it at the end of the day. Like, we can sit and talk and strategize, forever and never actually do anything. So I would say, yes, strategize all day long, but hit an 80% mark. Once you feel that you're 80% comfortable, just go do it, and then figure out what you need to do to understand how to measure success and adjust. I mean, it's that constant pivot is what, and constant action, I think, is what generates that success.
And you were mentioning just earlier that, as far as, your planning, that it has to be flexible. And that really is, how an overall business plan for many businesses should be, is that, some people look at it as a static document, but it's not. It's something that it gives you a guideline, but it does have to be flexible, and it has to be able to bend with, the ebbs and flows that come along, because, it gives you a guideline, but it doesn't mean that you stay on this road even if a tree falls in the middle of it. You have to be able to detour. And so, that's maybe sometimes where people mess up, is it's like, I have to follow this to the letter, and, they're not really seeing the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
So, I'm glad that you were kind of pointing that out too, as well.
Absolutely. And that's where I'd add in there too. And kind of going back, I mentioned the whole EOS thing. I think where, and again, I'm just a consumer of that. I'm not a consultant or anything with it. Although I mentioned I've implemented it. What I like about the concept of the EOS is it's extremely pragmatic in its approach, and it's focused on outcomes. That you take time to sanity check against your values and kind of your mission and your positioning. And so it allows the flexibility to come in the how you get to those, not necessarily what you're trying to do. So you might say, as a business, I want to, be at $10 million annually in revenue by year 3. That's a top level goal. Well, what do I need to do over the next 3 years to hit that? Part of it is, well, we need to generate sales. Well, what do we need to do to generate sales? Okay, I need this many people to do this many numbers. And it's kind of breaking those down. And so it gives you a lot more flexibility in what's going on. But needless to say, the deeper anybody gets into those thoughts and conversations, I think it's important to surround yourself with other business leaders, either as peers, or certainly seek out mentors that you have somebody to bounce this stuff off of. Because and I'm sure lots of people have this feeling, it gets lonely at the top with these type of things, because your mind's spinning in a certain way, and it's definitely a unique proposition to deal with, and not everybody does. You can't necessarily go talk to your coworkers about it, or professional peers you might have as clients. It's definitely something where you need to talk with others that are handling and dealing with those same challenges on a daily basis.
Yeah, and there's ample mastermind groups around that we can plug into, and then there also are some of the CEO type organizations that do sort of the mastermind type thing as well, to where you're sitting in a room with a dozen or 24 other CEOs, people of your same level in other businesses, to where you can bounce those ideas off of each other. And it's like having a board of trustees, as it were, to where you can kind of bounce that around and be able to weed through some of those difficult situations.
Absolutely.
So what do you think, just in your experience, Glenn, is kind of behind why so many entrepreneurs are failing or giving up nowadays?
That's a good question. I think there's a big chunk of it is, I think there's a sex appeal to entrepreneurship, but not so much so to understanding what success even is. I know that's kind of a weird answer to it. So you jump in and I want to do a startup. And I think this is actually slightly tailored down over the past decade. I mean, you look at a decade ago, the amount of everybody, kids, whatever, jumping in and starting their businesses was huge, at least on paper. But the majority, as you know, were failures. And I think it's because many don't take the time to figure out where their blind spots are at. So I see this again, utilize some of these experiences. Somebody coming from the technology space might have, an engineer might have a great idea for something, but has no idea how to sell or how to be a people person. You might have a marketing person that has, again, a great concept but no idea how to build it. And I'm gonna keep hammering this. I think this is an underlying challenge of this hyper-connected antisocial nature we live in societally is nobody knows how to go find those people. And you also kind of have the underlying, like, everybody can be successful mentality. And again, that's at scale. On an individual basis, it kind of manifests differently. But even as, I'm hearing adults, in their 40s and 50s that talk like a kid out of college might, in terms of, I've got this idea, it's the greatest thing ever. And you're like, is it really? I mean, and maybe you can sell me on it, but it's the premise is the idea, not the execution. And so I see this, like I said, in the tech space, and then in the nonprofit space, it's also kind of bizarre where, I've seen many people, that it literally have said, I can't get a job, so I'm going to go start a nonprofit. And I mean, that to me is the most insane statement I've ever heard in my life. I've had at least 15 to 20 people that I've heard do that. I'm like, wait a second, you can't communicate to go get a job, so you're going to start a nonprofit, which actually it's harder and more difficult to make money, and sustain something. And then you have a mission you got to do that, again, just seems crazy. But again, I think we live in this anything's possible Instagram world where you see everybody else's surface level success and fail to understand what it takes to get there. I think Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V is done, as loudmouth as he is, I love him to death. And I had the pleasure of meeting him way early on to where he was speaking at the University of Texas. And I saw him out in the hallway of the ballroom and talked to him for 45 minutes without a single other person coming up to him. Nowadays, he'd be mobbed in that situation. Wow. Yeah. And the point being is he's been doing what he does for almost a decade. And now you're just noticing, again, you're seeing the tip of the iceberg. You're seeing the Instagram look at it, failing to realize all the hard work. And so I think that's that challenge. As I wouldn't dare say, as we get older and wiser, that, people are allergic to work. I think people just don't understand what it takes to do something. And some people also don't realize that there are people that are supposed to start businesses. There are people that are supposed to enhance somebody else's business. There's people that are supposed to be CEOs. There's people that are supposed to be janitors. And the sooner that you can have that self-awareness to figure out where you kind of fit into the world as it is, it's not to say that your path is already set out before you, but we have different skill sets for different things. So, so to really kind of like hammer home the answer, I think it's a lack of awareness and lack of perception of one's own abilities. And so folks are jumping in with these new business ideas without looking at who else is in the market. What does the market cap look like? I mean, how many T-shirt businesses do you see inside of the veteran space? It's insane. Right. There's numerous dozens. And I wouldn't pick on any one person, and I don't say this against anybody I know. I know a lot of people that are doing it successfully because they found specific, niches, or you've got, grunt style that sells freedom. They're positioning it differently. Right. But if you're the next person popping up and say, I want to have a, military lifestyle brand, the immediate question your peers should be asking is, how on earth are you going to compete? Not saying you can't. It's how are you going to compete in this? What's your market cap and how you're going to be successful? And I don't think anybody asks those hard questions. We even within the, I'm on the Veteran Business Affairs for the Small Business Administration. And one of our big focuses this upcoming year is not just encouraging veteran-owned business, it's actually moderately discouraging it, if you will. Not that this is an institutional perspective, but it's having real talk. So when veterans are coming to these different seminars and saying, hey, I've got an idea and a concept, it's asking these hard questions, saying, you know what, we believe you can do this, but you need lawyers and accountants, and you need these other pieces to be successful, because it doesn't do any good to go and get an SBA loan or the support if there's not a moderately decent probability of success.
Yeah, and here's kind of a shameless plug in here, because I do also have a conference that's coming up this next year in 2019. But I have the CEO of Vetted that is going to be doing a piece specifically to talk people out of, if there's going to be new business owners, people wanting to start a business. She's going to be doing a breakout session, to weed out the ones that really aren't up to the task. Because that's probably the kindest thing that we can do to somebody is take off the rose-colored glasses and sort of show them the reality of it. And let them see, is this really what I need to do, or do I need to kind of back up and reassess, reevaluate, and reattack?
Well, and imagine what happens when that, again, functions at scale, is you have more capital freed up for investments in businesses that have a higher chance of success, and you have more human capital freed up, as opposed to spinning their wheels trying to start something they might not be a fit for. They're able to contribute their talents to another business. And so it ends up, again, the more self-awareness that exists in the business space, the more successful everything is as a whole.
You're absolutely right. So what would you say maybe some of the roadblocks are that you would warn people against? You kind of mentioned some of those there, but are there any specific roadblocks that you think of?
Actual roadblocks themselves, I mean, a lot of them, again, is more laying and thinking about the groundwork, but I'd say the roadblock is making sure you pick the right people as you're growing, and sanity check that against values. And by values, and mind you, I've made this mistake in the past. We think of things like, we're going to be humble and grateful and ethical. Yeah, those might be your values, but did you take time to figure out why in the context of what you're doing? Because in reality, those should also drive the people you're bringing in. And think ahead. I mean, build the vision for the humans that are going to help grow your business a year, 3 years down the road in your mind. Okay, I know in the next year, to get to this next goal, we need to go and find, again, an engineer to build this thing. All right, well, once we build it, what's next? Well, we got to sell it. So who does that person look like? And it's thinking about that stuff well in advance, and then not being shy about being honest with those people that might fill those spots. Because I think a lot of people end up going both extremes, where they're not particularly transparent, and that ends up hurting their ability to gain the people, or they wait too long, and then suddenly, okay, we're ready to go and sell this thing, and now we got to go spend 6 more months finding the right person. So what do? You either delay sales or you hire the wrong people, and neither of those is really a great scenario. So I'd say it still comes down. That's probably the underlying theme that anybody listening would hear is people is it. I mean, life is about people and figuring out how to work with them, and then overlaying problem solving and process to make things easier.
And something you've been mentioning kind of several times, either directly or indirectly, is when you're having that focus, is then also sort of reverse engineering it, taking it backwards to this is where we want to go. Now, what does it take to actually get there? And the people are part of that, but taking the time as a business owner to reverse engineer the process, taking those key process indicators, as we call in my business, and just take it all apart and look at the pieces, and then evaluate those pieces, and what does it take to make those pieces? Just reverse engineering it, and making sure that you can put it back together the correct way then.
Absolutely. Well, and it's figuring out too, it's like, how do you do things in a sustainable and consistent manner? I mean, anybody that has content production as a portion of what they're doing. And again, I've fallen into this trap myself, where especially when you have a really small team or you're starting out, you get super excited and you go create all this content for 2 months, and then it disappears because you've got other stuff come up. And then 3 months go by and you're like, man, this is bad. And then it creaks up. And the perception externally is that you're basically a schizophrenic business, and probably run by one person, because that's what happens. I mean, we can see through it. So it's kind of looking at those micro challenges and say, I know it's difficult, but instead of, cranking the volume up to 10, why don't we keep it at a steady 5? Because a steady 5 is better than, somebody going, up and up. And then it's also figuring out, I think a lot of people don't realize how inexpensive it is to go find, contract talent for 10 to 20 hours a week, whether it's for, personal assistance, it's for communications, those sorts of things. I mean, you can find individuals from, on the low end, $25 an hour, on the high end, like $70 an hour, that can do these things that, significantly move the needle, presuming you have the right process to then handle it and come back to it. I mean, we've done this with OSD recently, and working with Mad Skills that places military spouses in those type of jobs. And The gal that we have working on communications right now is amazing. I mean, it's one of these things where, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I almost want to hit my head against the wall saying, well, why didn't we do this a year ago? Because the value of what she's able to bring to the table for what we're paying for it is immensely better than my inability to focus on that consistently at the amount that I cost to do it. And so it's constantly, again, looking at those types of things and figuring out, well, what can we do and what can we adjust today to, again, have that consistent message going out.
Yeah. And here another gold nugget there is just delegate.
Yeah.
So what are some of the specific resources you again kind of we're mentioning some of those, like virtual assistants or being able to outsource, but what are some specific resources that you come across that you've taken advantage of maybe?
So I'd say from a technology stack, it's finding the right products. I mean, we use Hootsuite is one, which I think that's a good resource. Making sure you find a good CRM. I mean, unless you're a wizard with Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets, which I don't think most people are as much as they are. I'd say reading in general. I mean, that's really comes down to. I'm an avid reader. I'm a fan of books, probably more so than reading blogs. I mean, I'll read blogs now and again from people that I look up to, Simon Sinek or something. But he also is writing books, and the reason why I've been doing as much is it forces you to kind of pull yourself back from technology for a little bit, because let's face it, when we read blogs, we're reading it on a computer or an iPhone or something, and those really force you to think about something that's slightly more timeless, because it was written to be something physical, something static. And sure. I recommend a couple books that I've come back to a few times. One of them is called Sense Making, and sense making, for context, is kind of the other answer to design thinking. So, the design thinking process has a lot of the different aspects of what we've been talking through here. It's coming up with outcomes-based ideas based on human-centric design, but it's focused on action, not just talking about it. But one of the inherent challenges is, and that's why kind of sense making comes up, is it's really looking at the why. Why are we actually doing this? Why does this make sense? Hence the name. And so I've really liked that book. And then another one is Thinking, Fast and Slow. That one's a little bit dry for some people. It really gets into a lot of behavioral psychology. But I would strongly suggest anybody that's serious about any human-facing role or running a business, at least become a hobbyist with behavioral psychology. What's great about psychology is, again, at scale, it is what it is, and it has been that way forever. We behave the way we are and continue to behave that way. And so there's always a little gut instinct that needs to go into things. But if we're interacting with people in a certain way, and it's not working, and you realize you're running counter to how our brains actually function, again, as an individual, in small groups and large groups, it ends up making just adjusting to the reality of how our brains work is huge. And really, I mean, it's pandering. It's what it is, pandering to the reality of the way our brains work. But the more and more you can become okay with that, that part of science, I actually think it makes jobs easier. And so I've my whole outside of the nonprofit, a lot of my consulting work, that's what it comes from. It's basically making sense out of people and, coming up with pretty solid bets on where we should take products or services based upon how, our identified demographic thinks. But outside of that, the main resource is just finding other people that you can have legitimate conversations about, that you can be open with, about your challenges. I'm definitely big in even sharing kind of the personal side of things, mainly because I think that massively impacts what's happening in your professional world on a daily basis. And so taking that into account is big. So I don't know if that answers it directly. I don't have a magic 8-ball or anything I really go to, but reading and talking, those are the two primary resources.
Well, some good ones there. And I appreciate those, couple books that you had mentioned. So, it gives some people some things they can look at. And No, you're right. The psychology that's involved in business is pretty amazing because, when you understand who's across the table from you, then you also understand how you're going to react to that person.
Mm-hmm.
And, most importantly is understanding what type of a person that you are to be able to pair up with the type of person that's across the table.
Absolutely.
Because, they need certain things and we're going to convey certain things. So knowing how to adjust and work with that is going to make or break the deal.
Absolutely.
So as far as we were mentioning earlier, values and belief systems, how do you incorporate that into your business projects that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I'd say my faith certainly drives my day to day, and part of that is the ethical approach, and I'd say not just the ethical approach, because I think it's mailing in to say that it's the why, but secondary to that, it's the service. I mean, I truly believe, as I mentioned prior, we're put on this earth to serve others, and to figure out how we can create other servant leaders to serve others. And it's probably the most succinct answer I could give. When I wake up in the morning, I'm trying to do my best to figure out how can I serve other people today, micro and macro. So it goes back to that balance of, if I could, I'd love to talk to 20 individuals. I'd love to sit down and talk with each of them for an hour and figure out how we can identify something they're trying to work through and determine next steps together within a lot of the frameworks that we've discussed here. But that's not, that's not going to happen the way we like it. So it's looking at the bigger picture of how do we use a platform or a soapbox that has been created to reach more people with the broader side to maybe inspire others to then go do the same. And so that's really, in talking to a lot of people, especially in the, veteran advocacy space, and especially I've had this conversation with women as well, but certainly with men is, if faith is something that drives you, bring it up and talk about it. Because I actually think it creates a more honest conversation. Not that if somebody has a different set of beliefs or faith that you should cast that aside. Absolutely not. But I think the better you can understand somebody's motivations and where they come from, the better you can help them. And so that's where, if I look at, say, somebody that, maybe is battling alcoholism or something, the whole thing about the 12-step program is still rooted in faith. It's this cleansing, and it's this repentance and able to move forward with it because of our nature. And there's people that have gone into that certainly don't prescribe or are not Christian, and that's completely fine because there's still this underlying set of ethics and values that are there. So that's really, again, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is wake up in the morning and say, how can I at least make a positive mark on somebody else so that if today's my last day, we can go out with a win.
Yeah. And, something that I certainly embrace, with being a person of faith as well, is, not shying around that, because when you try to shy around really what makes you who you are, then that's not going to create a good business relationship with the other person. And so when it's right there in the middle of the table, it's no longer, the elephant in the room, so to speak. It's something that's very aware. And if that's a problem for the other person, that's okay too, because you probably shouldn't be doing business with them in the first place.
Yeah.
If it's that much of a stumbling block. And so, that's why I tell people, I don't shout around it. It's within the first 5 minutes, people are already know where I stand. But that's, it's to protect their time. It's protecting their time as well as mine.
Well, that's where you hit it on the head. I mean, you see this constant argument in the professional space, faith and politics, we can't talk about that. And I've always thought that to be odd. I think it's just the nature of, again, how we communicate today being somewhat broken. I truly believe if you can't talk about that stuff, even if you don't agree, you can't really have a relationship with somebody. Like, you have one on the surface, but if you don't understand what their motivations are, and I've always said politics somewhat tends to be kind of a day-to-day manifestation of what somebody's faith actually is, because, or at least it should be. Politics, if it's based upon actual policy, should be a reflection of your underlying values. And it's not a purpose to get into an argument with somebody. It's to have intelligent discussions, because at the end of the day, again, what drives one person versus another to wake up and, struggle to build a business is coming from two different perspectives. And being able to understand that is huge. And, whether or not somebody wants to believe it, I truly believe, faith as a general word is what drives everybody's ability to go out in business, whether it's faith in, God and following Jesus, or it's faith in just whatever the heck it is you believe in that makes you want to get up. Otherwise, I come back to this natural conclusion of what's the point? So again, maybe I'm taking the easy way out at this point, but those are, back to your question, what keeps me up at night. That's probably more along the lines of what keeps me up at night is those mental gymnastics of, what's the right way to think about this? And, what's the best way to communicate it in a manner that is not a turnoff for others. But it's that living and functioning in a way that serves to inspire, or at least, raise question where somebody says, what's that guy doing? What makes him different? And, hopefully somebody asks. And at that point we can have something, a more substantive conversation on faith. And shoot, I don't know everything. I'm still trying to figure out, and certainly will until I die. So all I can do is help other people on the journey, and they can help me out as well.
Yeah. And, at the core, this is Legacy Cast. And, that at the core, that's what a legacy is just, inspiring other people to think and go, So, when you're starting your businesses, what particular hurdles did you run into as far as starting it and getting it going?
I just say it was time. I mean, it really comes down to time and focus. I tend to certainly bite off a little bit more than I can chew. Though I also get brought in oftentimes to help businesses that are struggles. So I've only had a couple businesses I've started from scratch. Most others are somebody that had the wherewithal to say, hey, I'm missing a piece or set of pieces, and I solved that particular need and took, something that was small with potential and put us on the right path to become something that's larger. So the struggles with those still comes down to, hiring the right people. So even if you develop the right processes, who are the people that are going to execute at it? And so typically I've seen that manifest at scale, medium-sized businesses that start hitting that like 50-person number. And then again, when you hit that 150-person number, you start getting to these points where your internal makeup, or dare I say culture, starts to make less sense. You end up with a situation of where, say you were a highly skilled workforce at 35 employees. As you hire more and more, especially within specialty skill sets, it's impossible to maintain that high skill level across every. You can't have 150 people and 100% of them be high skilled. I mean, it's the same thing. You look at Google, the entire company, while obviously has a lot of smart people, it's still tiered. There's still tiers of skill level. And I think a lot of the same percentages work down to smaller businesses. And so the biggest challenge is, how do you, whether it's typically if it's a product, it has to do with how you message and sell it. And if it's a service, it's how you execute on it. How do you mitigate against what is a perceived talent drop off over time, while still, again, executing at a quick pace that allows you to go and generate revenue?
So was that solution kind of obvious to you, or did you kind of stumble on that over time?
Kind of stumble on it. I still have challenges getting around it. I mean, I was thinking, one company I was a part of a number of years ago, we had this mantra. The actual tagline was, "We're smarter than you." And I saw that story. It was true for probably the first 50 employees. I mean, we hands down were. But the problem is we couldn't, you bring in new clients and we have to execute and, build stuff. And the next 50 people can't be smarter than you. The next 50 people, in order to properly build a business that is actually profitable, have to be kind of this junior mentality. So it comes back to, again, some of these themes about delegation and force multiplying is you have to have a baseline and clear purpose and direction. And then that allows you to develop people into certain, into certain roles that can execute, again, at scale at the lower levels. I still don't know what the actual solution is. I don't think anybody does. It's more of a matter of constantly getting a pulse and figuring out, how do we hire the 51st person versus the 80th and keep on going. And some of that has to do with, understanding what success is for those individuals. And some of them stay and some of them go, but the goal is to obviously keep as many people as possible so that you're not having to onboard people constantly.
So what compelled you to start a nonprofit with Operation Supply Drop?
So I joined. So it was actually founded by another gentleman in 2010. I came on about 2013 after they tracked me down. My family had been supporting the organization as donors. And I guess after a bit of time, they reached out and said, hey, we want to do something for you, for our family. I said, no, and you don't need to do anything for us. Why don't you let me be basically your volunteer chief marketing officer for a while? And so at that point, it was basically a garage, charity, if you will, sending these video game care packages downrange. I liked the underlying concept, but I saw the future value of, wait a second, we're developing a relationship with these service members at a very early on point with something extremely relevant. And in the 2013-2014 timeframe, what was fascinating is a lot of these men and women, start redeploying, transitioning out, and we get all these emails and phone calls. Hey, I need help. Not a single follow-up question I had anything with video games. It was all, again, your typical transition stuff, like I need to make friends, I need to find a job, I need to find resources. And kind of, again, made what I thought was a safe bet and said, you know what, let's start some chapters, because I thought it was odd. Why are they calling us and not the other 70,000 veteran nonprofits, many of which we work with in a number of communities? And it came down to, said, well, you get us. And you get us during active duty, and they wanted us to figure out how to have something in transition. And so really, at that point, I got asked to be the CEO and join the board. And I could say the rest is history, but really what we've been building is that initial program of these video game care packages that continue to grow. I mean, we're sending them to 6,000 to 12,000 troops a month. We work with dozens of USOs and MWRs and rec centers all over the world, but we have this complementary chapter system with, again, this social, professional, and servant leadership focus, to where it kind of reaches back into the active duty side. So oftentimes, yes, the first point of contact with OSD is while you're deployed, or even you might be here in CONUS, on installation, working with us somewhere, and you're working with people on the other side of the gap, which is absolutely fantastic, because it allows us to have that complete ecosystem where people are reaching back to help others across.
So is there some other kind of profession that you've toyed with wanting to do that you haven't done yet?
Absolutely. So I still love being in the tech space. That's something where my itch is constantly scratched. I just like solving those type of problems. I've had the pleasure of working with clients like Disney. I've gotten to work on smart weapon systems and unmanned vehicles with companies like Northrop Grumman, cyber operations, just because it's fun. So that's really what it kind of comes down to. And it's the statement I made earlier. And I encourage everyone to think about this, because I'm very confident that many people listening are often told, hey, you wear a lot of hats. And I think there's an introspective moment there, which is, A, do you wear a lot of hats? And B, should you be wearing a lot of hats? And there's kind of two paths on the should you be. Number one, well, I can wear the same hat and do a whole bunch of different things, and that forces me to connect them all. So even though I have all these seemingly disparate roles, at the end of the day, it's because I like problem solving, process, and people, and bringing those things together. And it doesn't matter where. But then to others, it might be, we have this challenge, I think, is especially humans in 2018 here, to try to bite off more than we can chew, to focus on too many different things. And perhaps you need to ultra focus on one or two and drop the other 8 and just go full bore on them. Jump off the cliff and build the parachute as you're falling. But that's really, that's with me, is it's just trying to figure out how to just help other people and have some fun and do some cool stuff along the way. That's my personal part, is I want to build cool things and meet cool people, which seems like a pretty simple way to look each day. Yeah,
that's a pretty good way to wind out our time here this morning. Now, people need to get a hold of you, Glenn. So what are some good contact methods that you can put out there? Emails, phone numbers, whatever.
Absolutely. So the best one with me is LinkedIn. You can look me up, Glenn D. Banton. That's B as in boy, Anton on LinkedIn. Send me a message. Feel free to connect with me. If you wouldn't mind, if you heard it on here, just drop me a message. Happy to share additional wisdom. And then certainly go check out OSD at weareosd.org. Other than that, hopefully everybody can capture it. Like I really like to help others wherever I can. And so whether it's myself directly or opening up my network, again, we're here to connect. That's what this life is about. And certainly appreciate the opportunity to share this message with you as well as your audience.
I appreciate your time here, Glenn. And I know you're a busy guy. So like I say, with everyone that comes on the program, I'll see you around the bend, my friend.
I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you. You've been listening to Legacy Cast. Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to come back next time as we speak with more top influencers, industry experts, and business owners from around the world.